Donald Trump has sought to control the message, to mold public perception, to shape the way people see him and experience him. He lied about his wealth. He lied about the 2020 election. Heck, his booking in Fulton County, Georgia, clocked him at 6'3", 215 pounds. Mystifyingly, nearly 30 pounds lighter than his last White House physical, which was always sort of questionable in and of itself. And while, yes, he's been punished for some of those things, including a $350 million penalty in the civil fraud trial, Trump has always been able to shape his own narrative, to tell his own story. Until today. That's because the chilly Manhattan courtroom, in which Trump now spends his days, awake or otherwise, is not in his control at all. And for all his threats, all his efforts at intimidation, this is foreign territory to the disgraced ex-president, entirely immune to his particular brand of bloviating and misrepresentation, where only one thing really matters: the truth. Today, opening statements began in that historic election interference and hush money trial in New York City. Attorneys for Trump and for the Manhattan District Attorney sought to frame the case as they're prepared to make in front of the jury. While the defense tried to frame Trump as a sympathetic figure, somehow separate from Michael Cohen's payments to Stormy Daniels, the prosecution laid the facts of the case, which really aren't in much dispute, out for the jury. Matthew Colangelo, a lawyer on Alvin Bragg's team, suggested this, quote, "We'll never know, and it does not matter, if this conspiracy was a difference maker in the close election." But as our colleague Lisa Rubin reported from inside the courthouse, the prosecution appears ready to provide evidence of how concerned Trump's campaign was at the time and how Stormy Daniels' lawyer, Keith Davidson, texted David Pecker, the former publisher of the National Enquirer, on election night and wrote this, quote, "What have we done?" Colangelo insisted this was a criminal conspiracy and a cover-up designed to hide important information from the American voter, to ensure that such embarrassing details would never, ever, ever see the light of day. Of course, they did, and here we are, years later, possibly on the verge of accountability, definitely on the cusp of another face-off between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Again, Donald Trump, though, has no choice about this. He is forced to sit there in his own trial, listening to all of the testimony as lawyers go through his past in excruciating detail. Stripped of his ability to shape his own narrative, it is getting easier and easier to imagine Trump, to see him as what he is, a criminal defendant charged with some pretty serious offenses. It's the topic of a new ad from the Republican Voters Against Donald Trump. Watch.
I was wondering if you guys are hiring right now. I was thinking about applying for a job. I was thinking about applying for a job here. I'm currently facing 88 felonies. For detention of classified information. Do you all take people that have been found liable for sexual assault, trying to overturn the 2020 election, falsifying business records? I was wondering if that was going to be a problem.
Working with diamonds and jewelry. They're going to do a background check.
Yeah.
So that's the only.
So probably not.
Yeah.
So do you guys hire people that sexually assault other people, or?
We run a phone background.
Okay.
No, we don't. I don't think so.
Okay.
Donald Trump, based on that ad and in reality here on Earth One, probably wouldn't be able to get a job at a mall. David Axelrod summed it up quite eloquently in The Atlantic today, quote, "As Trump sits and watches the criminal trial he hoped to avoid unfold, he must know that a potential reckoning he has spent a lifetime eluding could be coming. He has been reduced to a criminal defendant in a courtroom where someone else has absolute power, and the rules very definitely apply. The weariness and vulnerability captured in those courtroom images betray a growing recognition that he could wind up as the thing his old man most reviled. A convicted criminal? No. Worse. A loser." It's where we start the hour with some of our favorite reporters and friends. Here with me at the table, senior executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion and MSNBC political analyst Tim O'Brien's here, and lawfare legal fellow and courts correspondent Annette Bauer is here. You're both down at the courthouse today. Also joining us, MSNBC contributor and columnist Charlie Sykes is back, and former senator and co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, our dear friend Claire McCaskill, is here. Take me inside the day at the courthouse.
It was very cold, waiting in line for a few hours,
Yeah.
at least 2 to get in there, before Trump even went into the courtroom to, for the first day of opening statements. In the criminal case, he was railing against the New York State Attorney General Tish James as it related to his civil case, which there was a hearing in an adjacent courtroom. You talk about his worst nightmares. Not only is he the object of derision, he's in this, we talked about this last week, but this bonfire of the vanities-esque court setting with multiple courtrooms, and he's the center of attention in both for things he doesn't want scrutinized. And one, it's his money, and in the other, it's the truth. And
the third is his personal life, right? He had Pecker bury these things if he wanted them out there. His friend went to caught and killed them.
And I think, they ultimately failed to keep it under wraps. And it affects, I think, his marriage. It affects his sense of who he is in the world, only vis-a-vis the images he wants to create. Because I think he loves, at some level, being a macho philanderer. I think he holds on to that shows he's attractive and robust and a winner. But now all of that is being unspooled in the courtroom. It was I think the opening statements were good. I think Trump has a very capable legal team with him this time around, which he traditionally hasn't. One, because he usually stiffs his lawyers, and secondly, because he's a nightmare client. Mm-hmm. And some people get into it for the advertising, and then they get schooled and they don't want to go near him again. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But after that, it was very process-oriented. The big show of the day was David Pecker taking the stand, but that got truncated, and the hearing ended earlier than I expected it would. But it'll pick up again tomorrow, and Pecker's testimony is going to be really interesting.
Well, and the whole idea of who's in charge. So the court ended earlier than it was supposed to because one of the jurors had a dental appointment. So it isn't even Trump's teeth that, it sounds like the judge would accommodate a dental emergency from anyone, but it just shows where the power lies, where all the accommodations and considerations lie. They're with the jury that will decide his fate.
Right. And I think that we saw today just how much effect the jury can have on Trump's demeanor and also the attorney's demeanors as well. Trump, I've seen him in multiple jurisdictions where he's charged. He often is scowling, can be, loudly speaking to his attorneys, making kind of grimacing faces. Today, he still made some of those faces, but reeled it in a little bit. He was scolded last week for trying to get up to leave court too early. But today, he seemed to be at least in court on his best behavior. And we also seem to see that Todd Blanche, who presented the opening statements, seemed to be a little bit more restrained in the way that I've seen him make arguments before other judges, like Judge Eileen Cannon down in Florida. And a part of that, I think, has to do with the jury being there and everyone being on their best behavior and kind of playing to their audience. Before I want to bring Claire and Charlie into this, but David Pecker walking in the room is a totally different opening witness than Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen, and Trump has sought to villainize Michael Cohen, probably with some success in Trumplandia. But David Pecker was his guy. What was that moment like?
Well, I was surprised at how at ease Pecker was. He was laughing. At points, he was almost like giggling out loud. The other reporters in the room I was in began laughing when he began laughing. We couldn't be heard, but it had a little bit of the theater of the absurd about it.
Yeah.
Again, with Trump, it's this sort of, he's like this crypt keeper of the 1980s and 1990s, and all of these characters from that era come rolling out. He and Pecker launched a magazine together, Trump Style, which was hilarious in and of itself because there's no one, I think, ever who's been in the public eye who has the worst taste on the planet like Donald Trump. His style is so bad that it's his style. And he and Pecker sort of worshipped him in the way that I think people who align around Trump in his orbit, they have this unschooled hero worship. And he either burns them or disposes of them. Very few last long. And Pecker lasted long because he was useful to Trump. Trump knew how to weaponize Page 6 and the gossip pages and publications like National Enquirer to go after his enemies, to feather his own nest, and to keep this myth alive that he was the biggest real estate developer in New York and very smart and very attractive, when in fact he's this hot mess of insecurities who needs the media attention to feel good about himself.
Well, it's clear that the prosecution doesn't plan to make the friendship isn't the crime. It's the illegal covering up, the timing of the covering up with the intent to deceive the voters. It seems like we didn't get much visibility into how the prosecution plans to use Pecker as a narrator or a storyteller, but that's all indications suggest that's where they're heading.
Right, and I think that he certainly will be a key witness in terms of proving Trump's intent. There has to be an intent to defraud, and then he also has to have an intent to conceal or aid another crime. That is what makes this charge a felony. And I think that the prosecution, although there wasn't quite a lot of insight into what exactly the theory will be in terms of the exact theory around that step-up crime. There were a lot of mentions of Pecker being, from that 2015 meeting at Trump Tower onward. He's someone who can speak to Trump's state of mind, his intent. And so I think that is one reason why he will be a powerful witness.
And he's a fact witness.
Yeah, and something everyone said who was down there was that for all that we know about this episode and these characters, already there was new evidence today. New texts, new emails, new information. Did you find that?
I think that there was, and there's been some discussions as well at the end of the day around what exactly will be admissible. There's a lot of discussions around documents that we have not seen, that are not public, and it's to be determined whether or not some of those documents will be admissible. We heard a lot about phone records that the prosecution intends to introduce. So I think that we certainly will see new evidence, but the question is, there were these questions about whether it would be admissible for hearsay reasons. That sort of thing is still to be determined. So whether we get to that point and actually see some of that evidence that was discussed today, we'll see. But I certainly think that there will be a lot of new things that come out throughout the course of the trial.
Hey, everyone. MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.